Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I appreciate your all's time today. So we're going to begin. Welcome to this edition of the ADI webinar series brought to you by Genesis. Over the next 15 minutes, and it's probably going to be more like 20, 25 or so, we will discuss the dangers of cheap cable, the ways dishonest cable manufacturers cut corners, and the ways you could get burned by installing substandard cable. Too good to be true? Always question a curiously low price. If you go to another distributor and they quote you a curiously low price on Cat 5e, way cheaper than what ADI's everyday low price is, everybody likes to save money, myself included. But this quote is too good to be true. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. How do they do that? Once your initial disbelief subsides, you astutely decide to find a spec for the mystifyingly inexpensive cable. So what does the spec say? And there you see it. The three letters that should never caress the smooth PVC jacket of a genuine category cable, CCA, which also stands for copper clad aluminum. Let's start with a brief comparison of bare copper, the material category cable conductors should be made of, and aluminum. Copper is a soft, flexible metal that makes it relatively easy to install and terminate. Aluminum is stiffer and more brittle. As such, it's harder to install and more prone to breaking. Copper has excellent conductivity. This means low resistance and low power loss. Aluminum, on the other hand, is much more resistive, which increases power loss and severely limits the distance that it can effectively transmit power at low voltage. Copper is heavier than aluminum. One of the easiest ways to determine if a box of category cable contains copper-clad aluminum is by picking it up. If you feel like you're considerably stronger than you were yesterday when you picked up a legitimate box of cable, I regret to inform you that you're still weak and you probably are just picking up a box of cheap, non-compliant cable. Sorry. Copper is the metal of choice because it is the most cost-effective for the level of performance that it offers. Aluminum is much less expensive, but the trade-off in performance far outweighs the savings. What is copper-clad aluminum? A copper-clad aluminum conductor is almost entirely aluminum with a thin layer of copper on the outer surface. Because of an electrical phenomenon known as skin effect, electrical charges of high-frequency signals travel on the surface of conductors instead of penetrating to the core. Therefore, in theory, copper-clad aluminum is a cost-effective solution for high-speed IP applications, right? Wrong. Let's find out why. Why avoid copper-clad aluminum? It's true that copper-clad aluminum can support the type of data signal used for IP applications, but there are several reasons why copper-clad aluminum should be avoided. Copper-clad aluminum cannot support power over Ethernet. In IP applications, demands conductors with less resistance to minimize power loss. Copper-clad aluminum cannot compete. Secondly, The types of connectors used with category cable are not well suited for aluminum. Finally, if the other two reasons aren't already enough, copper-clad aluminum conductors should not be used because the National Electric Code forbids them. In other words, it's illegal to use copper-clad aluminum category cables. Copper-clad aluminum cannot support Power over Ethernet. Power over Ethernet simplifies cabling infrastructure and the need to hire an electrician to run separate power circuits. As the applications of PoE have evolved, the amount of power transmitted over category cables has grown. It is more critical than ever to have low resistance conductors. CCA conductors lead to excessive voltage drop, which forces PoE devices to compensate by pulling higher currents. The result is faster wear on electrical components, which leads to premature device failure and unprotected assets. No camera manufacturer will honor a warranty if they find out the wrong cable was used. Don't fry your cameras, just install the correct cable. As we learned, aluminum is much more brittle than copper. This makes CCA conductors especially problematic for network cable terminations. Category cables are most commonly terminated with IDCs or insulation displacement connectors. Rather than stripping insulation from the end of each conductor, contractors use a special tool to punch down each conductor between opposing knives. The knives cut through the insulation and make contact with the conductor. A soft conductor, like copper, results in a secure connection, whereas a brittle conductor, like aluminum, lacks the durability to maintain a reliable link. Finally, the National Electrical Code and underwriters' laboratories prohibit the use of copper-clad aluminum for communication, wire, and cables. A category cable employing CCA does not qualify for a UL or an ETL listing, and consequently, it cannot legally be installed. High-quality cable will last 25 years or more if installed correctly. The PVC itself and the jacket is not the expensive part. It's the additives and the stabilizers that make the plastic safe, durable, and code compliant. If you don't have those additives in the plastic, this will dramatically hinder the long-term performance of the cable. The most important additives are UV stabilizers and flame retardants. Plastic with UV stabilizers can crack over time when exposed to the sun, the cold, or the heat. But if there's no flame retardants, the results could be devastating in a fire. Will it burn? The hardest to catch is cable that does not have flame retardant, but there's a simple test you can do to see how it burns. Take a Bic lighter and light the end of the cable. On a product with flame retardants, you'll see the cable push the flame back. On a cable that's missing those flame retardants, you'll see it pull in like the wick on a candle. As the test continues, you'll see with the cable lacking flame retardants, the flame will separate from the lighter and navigate its way up the cable. At Genesis, we don't tolerate error. That's why we deliver wire that works. The first time, every time. We see the cable as the backbone of the solution. Keep your eye on the big picture. Short-sightedness today leads to hindsightedness tomorrow. Skimp on cable and risk losing or prematurely damaging your reputation. The point is, don't skimp. Consider this analogy. With all the choices of beer available today, do you really want to be the person who shows up to the party with a generic light beer? Such an action is unforgivable and will leave a literal and figurative aftertaste that will never be forgotten. The same is true for cable. Show up to a job site with cheap, generic cable and a plain white box. You're setting yourself up for failure and a damaged reputation. Let's say the cable supplier did a good job faking it and you didn't catch it. The inspector probably will. The inspector will find it below standard and require it to be ripped out and replaced with approved cable. You're wasting money, you're wasting time and labor, and you're harming your reputation. Was it worth it? Was it truly a savings at that point? So, you've installed a device using cheap cable. Everything works fine and you call it a day. But what happens when the device fails prematurely? Because it will, it's annoying. You have to roll a truck, you have to grab a screwdriver, you have to remove the old device, you have to install the new device, and at the end of the day, was the cable savings worth it? In the long run, it costs more money, and then excessive cable resistance forces devices to pull more current to compensate. Its elevated current draw causes a device to literally cook itself, and improper wiring voids device warranties. If it fails, the only solution is a complete rewire. Total waste of money. What if not just the device fails, but the cable fails too? At best, you waste time finishing new wires, but in a more complicated installation, well, let's just hope your schedule is open and your drywall skills are good. Doomsday arrive. Inspection passed 10 years ago. You still can be held liable. Now imagine, with a stroke of a seemingly good luck and good disguise, you pass inspection. Maybe you dodged a bullet. The inspector gives you a pass. Then 10 years later, the building burns down. The wire is determined to be at fault. They sue the manufacturer, the distributor, the dealer, the installer. They sue you. You pay thousands to disprove your liability. Worse, you're found liable. Game over. You will be held accountable. If a counterfeit cable is installed and identified, the manufacturer, the distributor, and you are liable. They will want to sue everyone. It may be difficult to track down an elusive offshore manufacturer, so the focus will shift to you. You will be held accountable for not using certified cable, not just the manufacturer. If there's a catastrophic failure, you know how it is. They sue everybody. They'll name the manufacturer, they'll name the distributor, and they'll name you. And if you use a sketchy cable from a little-known offshore manufacturer, how easy do you think it will be to track them down? You, however, easy to find and easy to hold accountable for. They will ultimately come after you. You will be held accountable. Knowledge of non-compliance is not required. Enforcement tools, suspending installation, requiring repair, criminal penalties, and civil liability. In a webinar series from CCA titled Non-Compliant Communication Cable, Natalia Medley Counsel for Crowell and Mooring talks about issues and liabilities relating to installing non-compliant cable. She'll go into how the knowledge of the non-compliant cable is not required to be held liable. She then discusses the tools for enforcement, including suspending the installation, requiring repair, criminal penalties, and civil action. She goes into some detail on civil liability.
Something to note in general, knowledge of non-compliance is not required. In other words, if an installer purchases cable and goes to install it and doesn't necessarily know about whether or not it actually complies with the NEC standards, that is not a defense in most cases to liability and penalties for these types of violations. The next one here, there are criminal penalties in many of these jurisdictions, not in all, but in many. We're not talking about serious criminal penalties. Most are misdemeanors. So that would mean fines generally of $1,000 to $2,000, depending on what the nature of the violation is, but also may include some jail time. And so I say that not to scare you, but to say, those enforcement mechanisms are on the books. It is, of course, always up to a prosecutor or whoever is administering the law to decide when to go after and when to seek these types of penalties. But there are criminal penalties, including jail time of up to 6 months, authorized for violations of building codes in some of these jurisdictions. In the case of a civil liability, it's a lawsuit. So a private party suing another private party, in this case, the contractor or the installer, for damages sustained as a result of non-compliant cable that wasn't installed. So for instance, and maybe most relevant here, is if there were a fire that occurred that was as a result of or made worse by the installation of a non-compliant cable, there may be a cause of action, a viable cause of action for damages that could be filed by the property owner, the inhabitant, whoever was in that building at the time that this happened. And that would be a lawsuit. In many cases, it would be a lawsuit against the contractor or the installer.
There you heard it about lawsuits. The dangers of cheap cable. Inferior cable is always a bad idea. As we've seen today, when you use standard cable, you expose yourself to risks of long-term reliability of your work, premature device failure, permanent damage to your reputation, and even personal liability in litigation. Through our Genesis engineering approach, we use quality materials and innovation to deliver a better customer experience. At Genesis, we don't tolerate error. That's why we deliver wire that works the first time, every time, dependable, across every application. Genesis cable eliminates hassles and callbacks with easy access to products, warranties that cover and support the responsive. We've got your back. And I will follow that. I know that on this presentation, just thank you guys for your time. I am going to share Team Max with you momentarily as well. But one of the things that Genesis also has with our category cable on installations is we do offer a 25-year connectivity warranty with the connectivity partner of your choice. We call it SureLink. He didn't put it in the slide, my apologies, but we call it our SureLink warranty. It's very easy. We give you longer amounts of time than most of our competitors do to get that information in. And that 25-year connectivity warranty, whether it be a Leviton, Panduit, Hubble, whatever your choice is, whatever you guys need to use in that spec, we will do that. It's very easy to get in and be part of the SureLink warranty to get those back into us as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute, and then I'm going to bring up a territory map just to show you guys. I know you're calling in from different areas, just to show you not only do you have your ADI branches for support, but what Genesis actually has as support in your territories.